But when we get to Mark chapter 2, we include somebody that probably most of those people in the group would not have included. And he ends up being very important to the work of Jesus' ministry. He ends up being a close companion of Jesus, at least during the time when Jesus was on the earth and while he was doing his ministry. So if we'll start reading in Mark chapter 2 and verse 13, we'll take a look at this guy named Levi, who was also known as Matthew, the author of the first of the Gospels in our New Testament. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him, and Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous. I have come to call the sinners." Now, if I said we're going to have a special collection this morning to reach out to those who are in need of the gospel in other places, would that be pretty easy for you? To just reach back in the purse, reach back in the wallet, put a little bit more in the plate? We do that occasionally. I know that we support several mission works both in the continental United States and overseas. But there are a lot of people right here in Shamrock who are also in need of the gospel. And the question is it as easy for us to reach out to those who are close to us as it is for us to give a gift for somebody to reach out to someone who is far away from us? Personal contact with people in need of the gospel comes with a pretty high price tag. It's a lot easier to just write a check. It's a lot easier to just throw some money in the plate than it is to do the kind of outreach that many of us, to be honest with you, it's tough for us. It's difficult for us to do one-on-one evangelism or to try to reach people individually. So I've got three things here that I think are the reasons why it's so difficult for us, and you might be able to add numbers 4, 5, 6, and on down the line. Number one, we may have to leave the safety of the building and meet them in the streets. I don't know if you've noticed, as time has gone by, you see fewer and fewer people that attend gospel meetings. Do we still do gospel meetings when we're not COVID-sized? No. Most of the congregations where I've been have stopped doing them. Alva was still trying to do maybe one a year. But the people that showed up were us. And typically not a whole lot of us. I remember when I was a kid, Birmingham, Alabama. Daddy was an associate minister at the Central Church in Birmingham. And when we had a gospel meeting, it would last about 10 days. And everybody in the congregation, or at least to a little kid, it seemed like, everybody in the congregation would be there, plus all the congregations from around the area, plus people from all kinds of different denominational groups would come and join us. There was always a crowd for these gatherings. But the hard, cold truth of the matter is that the people that we need to reach with the gospel will not just show up at the building. It could happen occasionally, but it would be extraordinarily rare. So we may have to leave the comfort of the building and meet them in the streets. As Jesus was going by the Sea of Galilee, he was surrounded by a large number of good people who were seeking the truth. It would be as if all of us just got up and walked down Main Street and the whole crowd of good people is walking together in one place, and we're visiting and we're talking about the gospel and we're talking about the good things that God has for us. And, we're a pretty lovable bunch. Jesus and his disciples were like that. They were a good group of people. The people that were following him, even the ones that were kind of on the outside looking in that wanted miracles, they were good people. And as they were following Jesus, he had the choice of a whole bunch of folks that he could have called to be his apostles from people that were already recognized as good people, as lovable people. And then they go past the seat of customs, the King James calls it, the tax house. And Jesus sees a guy named Levi, also known as Matthew, and he's at work. He is in the very act, he's in the great big middle of being unlovable. Tax collectors were thought less of than just about anybody else in Jewish society. His office was located near the border of Herod's territory. So King Herod would tax you if you wanted to go out of his territory, and he would tax you if you wanted to come back in. At the same time, the Romans had their finger in the pie. So if you collected taxes for Herod, you also collected taxes for the Romans. And one of the reasons they were hated so much was that they were working for the enemy. They were in collusion with the occupational forces of Rome. And so there he is in the very act of being unlovable. These poor people were paying taxes like we pay taxes, but here's the one big difference. We dole out all those taxes, and we grumble to each other about doling out all those taxes. And in April or with COVID, July, or whenever it is that we ended up paying our taxes this year, we all had a little grumble to throw out there, and we all have an opinion on how those things should be used. And taxes are not a very delicate subject, but we don't meet the people that collect our taxes. These people knew Levi. They'd met Levi. They had sat in that little seat of customs with Levi while Levi said, you owe the government this much. And by the way, here's the surcharge and the handling charges. And most of the tax collectors were pretty wealthy folks. They had a face that they could put with their problem. I can't buy my kid a new pair of shoes, and there he sits. So it was a little bit more difficult perhaps for them than it is for us. Tax collectors were notorious for cheating. They did it well. I was watching a video about this sometime in the last 2 weeks as I was getting this sermon together. And he was talking about the hierarchy of tax collectors. I'd never thought about this. He said, think about organized crime. You've got a guy way down at the bottom of the chain, and his job is just to bring in the money, bring in the money, bring in the money. And he would pay the guy above him. Well, the guy above him had a little bit more responsibility and a little bit more clout, and so he would take in the money and pass the money up the chain. And somewhere around Galilee, there was a guy who didn't sit at the seat of customs. He just stayed in that great big old house by the lake because he was at the top of the food chain. Levi was not that guy. Levi was down the food chain a little ways, and as long as he kept those guys above him happy, he could do pretty much whatever he wanted to do with the rest of the money. They would come to him and say, okay, your payout this week is going to be $1,000. And if he made $5,000, he was just $4,000 to the better. So they cheated and they lied and they swindled and they did whatever they could to come out on top. And a lot of them had a lot of money because of it. And the people of Capernaum and Cana and all those little towns around the shoreline of the Galilee knew him by name and knew him by face because he was the one that was taking from them and giving to himself. Go over to Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18, beginning in verse 15. This is kind of a random passage, but it tells us a little bit about how they felt concerning the tax collectors. Matthew 18:15. You might recognize this as a passage that we've used when we talk about church discipline. We don't talk about it a whole lot anymore, but back in the days when we might withdraw fellowship from somebody, this passage would be read. But I just want you to notice one little thing about it as we get there. If your brother or sister sins, go and point it out to them individually, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would treat a pagan or a tax collector. This is Jesus talking. He said, I know how much you hate the tax collectors. If you got somebody in your assembly who is disagreeable, who is unwilling to change, who won't listen to any kind of reason, treat them like you treat a tax collector. That's pretty strong. And so here's Levi sitting at the seat of custom as they come walking by. And in spite of all that, Jesus invites Levi to be one of his closest companions. Now again, I ask you, wasn't there somebody in that crowd that was more qualified? Somebody that was nicer. Somebody who hadn't lied quite as much. Somebody who didn't have their pockets lined with the money of some of the disciples who were already following Jesus. But Levi said yes. He left a lot. He's a little bit like Zacchaeus. You remember Zacchaeus who climbed up in the tree because he was short and he wanted to see Jesus as he came by. And as Jesus comes by Zacchaeus' tree, he looks up in the tree and he says, come on down, I'm going to go have dinner with you. And Zacchaeus tells Jesus, if I've cheated anybody, I'll pay him back fourfold. Well, he cheated everybody. So he had a lot of money, but he was going to have to give up a lot of things because he was following Jesus. Matthew, that is Levi, says, yes, I'll follow you. He immediately leaves his job, leaves his security, and follows Jesus. And another source that I was reading this week said he had a lot more to lose than a lot of those other disciples. You see, if you're a fisherman, you can always go back to fishing. After Jesus' resurrection, in fact, we have a passage where Peter looks at the rest of them and he says exactly that. I'm going fishing. It's what we know how to do. And now that we can't be disciples anymore, now that Jesus has been killed, I'm going to go fishing. But what do you do when you're a member of this syndicate who's cheating the people? And you leave that job and go follow Jesus? Are you going to be able to just walk back in and say, hey guys, I changed my mind again. I think I want to be a tax collector? Now, his security, his job, his lifeline is gone. He will never again have that opportunity. It's be a disciple, be an apostle, or nothing. And eventually, some sources say that Matthew gave his very life for the cause, as most of the apostles did. One little sideline here I don't want you to miss. Did you notice that he has a designation, who his daddy was? He is Levi, the son of Alphaeus. There's another son of Alphaeus in the list of disciples, James, the son of Alphaeus. He's called James the Lesser sometimes, but James, the son of Alphaeus, to keep him separated from James, the brother of John, the son of Zebedee. So we've got two people who are following Jesus as apostles who are Bar Alphaeus, the sons of Alphaeus. Now, whether this is the same Alphaeus or not, we're not sure, but if it is, then we have at least 3 sets of brothers that are in the apostles. Right? You've got Peter and Andrew, James and John, Levi and James. Right? Number 2, we have to realize that these less than lovable people have friends. If you could just convert one of them and bring them in and help them grow, that's fairly doable, right? If they come in once a decade. But when Jesus reaches out to Levi, what's the next verse? Jesus is at Levi's house and he is surrounded by tax collectors and sinners. He's surrounded by the very people that his little group would be wary of. The folks that they had decided long ago is not where they would be seen. Folks that they would not be out in public with. Making friends is a little bit like getting married. Right? You fall in love with one of them, but you marry the whole bunch. And then you have to kind of get into their culture and figure out what it's like to be part of their group compared just to your group. Any of you ever do the World Bible School mailings? Particularly, we used to do them by airmail, and there were a lot of them that went to India. You realize there's 1 billion people living in India? Huge, just packed wall-to-wall folks over there. And we would send out one of these lessons to the people, and we would get back 10 lessons or 10 requests for more lessons. And you'd send out another lesson, and you would get back 10 more requests. And so you'd start with 10 students, and in a couple of weeks you'd have 100 students. And so a lot of the folks who were doing World Bible School and were excited about it week one realized that they weren't going to be grading 10 lessons a month. They were going to be grading 100 lessons. And of course that 100 then turns into 1,000, which turns into 10,000. It just ballooned. It was a wonderful thing, right? And we would celebrate the mail when all the mail came in, and we would look at these stacks of letters we were getting from India, and we would be excited about the work that was being done over there. But then somebody had to grade them. So when you make a friend, when you bring somebody in, they've got other people that are connected to them. They have a culture that's connected to them. Their little friendship circle has certain things they do and don't do, and you have to get to know all of that because you chose one person, or one person chose the Lord and attached themselves to your group. So to reach out to one is to reach out to many, which begs the question, how serious are we anyway? Are we going to get excited about one and live on that joy for the next 20 years? Or are we going to reach out to all their friends and all their friends and all their friends? It's the way the church grows. The church will never grow by you hoping that people will come hear your amazing minister. For many, many reasons. The church grows by personal contact. The church grows when I have contact with people, when you have contact with people, and when those people bring in the other folks with whom they have contact. Now, I've butchered an old hymn. This was written by Will Houghton, and you will recognize the song, but I messed it up pretty badly. So let me just read to you kind of what our hearts are singing when our voices are singing the real hymn. Lead me to one soul today. Oh, teach me, Lord, just what to say. But dearest Lord, don't give me two. You know I'm busy. I got things to do. Please, Lord, not three. I've got a date. I've done my one. The rest can wait. Lord, please don't send me 4 or 5. I lost my license. Now I don't drive. Some of you know where that phrase comes from. Some of you don't. I'm not 6 or 7, 8 or 9. I don't mean to be unkind, but I need some personal time to relax and unwind. Just lead me to one soul who's lost in sin, and I'll do my best to work them in. That sounds a little bit closer to reality for us than lead me to some soul today. Teach me, Lord, just what to say. Friends of mine are lost in sin and cannot find their way. Sounds a little bit more like us, doesn't it? I hope that our hearts are in tune with our voices when we sing that song. And then finally, the third one. We have to realize that good and righteous and religious people may separate from us if we get too involved with them. Good church people, and not all of them, but some of them, who become uncomfortable when they're surrounded by folks that are not us. When the outreach is to people that they might not find appealing. But how long are we going to keep on reminding the righteous? When we come together as a group and I present a message to you, 99% of the time you know the passage. You've heard it preached on several occasions. Maybe I say something different or in a different way than what you've heard before, but by and large, we're reminded of why we believe what we already believe. We're certainly in favor of Jesus eating and fellowshipping with the unlovables because we be they. But the whole idea of reaching out to the unlovables and undesirables on a regular basis, I think is tough for some of us. I'll just give you one, for instance, and then I'll leave it with you. I've known of a few congregations who, in order to get kids to the building on Wednesday nights, would feed supper. Right? So they would have a meal, and then after the meal they would have class. And I started noticing in their bulletins, it would say Sunday morning attendance 125, Sunday night attendance 60, and all that's normal. And then it would say Wednesday night attendance 123. And I said, well, that's nuts. How would you have 123 show up on a Wednesday night? I've got a good Wednesday night joke. Ask me sometime. The kids were coming in such droves that it became more and more difficult to deal with them. So you've got discipline problems. You've got food problems. We started out feeding 15, and now we're feeding 100. Becky's laughing. In college ministry, the catchphrase is, if you feed them, they will come. And we started at Northwestern at the Bible Chair feeding about 12 to 15. And when we ended Monday lunches last year, we were feeding about 75. And so they'll show up for that, right? They want to be included in that. But you have problems with personnel. Folks who said, well, I signed up to help you teach 15. I didn't sign up to help you teach 100. I signed up to help corral 15 during playtime. I didn't sign up to have 100 during playtime. I signed up for the cute little blonde-headed sweetheart of a girl that comes in and gives us hugs. I didn't sign up for that guy right there who comes in loud and uses abusive language and who sometimes runs out the building and doesn't tell us where he's going. I didn't sign up for that. You know what the problem is? I don't have a clue whether the sweet little blonde-headed girl is going to grow up and follow Christ, or whether that burly somebody that we just rather not have around right now is going to end up being the one that serves Christ and does a great job in his kingdom. You got no clue. You can't read their heart. Jesus called Levi because Levi's heart was open. And Levi followed Jesus because Levi's heart was open. But I dare say that there were folks in that group that didn't like Levi and weren't too keen on the idea of spending a bunch more time with him. And we know what the religious folks thought because we're told. They asked Jesus, or they asked Jesus' disciples, why in the world is your master, why is your rabbi, why is your leader eating dinner with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus said, well, it's easy enough. People who are well don't need a doctor. People who are sick need a doctor. I didn't come here to call those who are righteous, meaning you. I came to call the sinners. And at some point, Jesus' people need to get about the same business. All right, let's pray. Father, we all stand convicted. We all know that we could do better. Help us to see our opportunities. Help us to be willing to reach out to anyone and everyone who will give us the opportunity to share your message. We know that there's lots of people out there that are lost in sin, people that are struggling emotionally, physically, spiritually. Father, help us to be able to teach them your word, to encourage them to follow you, to help them come into Christ where they can find peace and everlasting life. It's in Jesus that we pray.